Today's date is June 26, 2018, and this is Nevertheless She Composed, a contemporary video anthology of women composers of the 21st century. This is episode NSC-06, and today our guest composer is Gabrielle Cerberville. Hello, Gabrielle.
Hi.
It's so nice to have you this evening, and we're just so excited to get to talk to you. I've been waiting all weekend for our visit, and just can't wait to dig in today. And if you're joining us on this episode and you have never experienced an NSC, this is the video version of a women's anthology of living and active and happy women composers. And, yes. And so Gabrielle is going to share a landscape of her life, career, and her hopes and dreams and all of that good stuff. So Gabrielle, we have been formatting these interviews with the theme of past, present, future, keeping it simple. So let's just dig right in and start with your past, and you tell us whatever it is that you want to talk about and how you got to where you are.
Okay, so music has been a part of my life forever. My mother is a music therapist. My parents both sang in choir. Actually, my mother was one of the first music therapists. She graduated from ASU like right when the music therapy program started. I think she was in their second graduating class. So from the time that I was tiny, she was taking me to all of these music therapy groups. We were participating, hanging out with mentally disabled adults, physically disabled children, just experiencing music as part of life. My parents both sang in church choir. I've been doing music since I was little. Got started in piano lessons when I was young, loved that. But I've always been very distracted musically, so I sort of started just kind of doing my own thing on the piano. I would drive my teachers insane because I would not practice Chopin, and instead I would be making up little things and wanting to do my own thing. And that continued for years. And I've frustrated many a teacher. But ultimately, when I was about 16 or 17, I really got into music theory and trying to discover how I could take the musical thoughts I had and put them on paper. Got introduced to film music, and that was a real interest for a while. And ultimately decided to study music composition in college. So went to Philadelphia Butler University for a year and transferred over to Butler. Graduated from Butler in 2014, and I've kind of been here in Indy ever since, doing a lot of different things.
Yeah, and now before everyone jumps my case, because they're going to say, oh, sure, you're interviewing Gabrielle because you two knew each other at Butler, we should say we did cross paths while we were there, but we didn't actually connect.
We did not.
Yeah, you were
at Butler after I left.
Yeah, absolutely.
We met exactly once.
Absolutely. And so, I have interviewed a couple of dear friends from Butler, but our paths did cross a little bit there. One thing and we talked a little bit about that, I was enamored with, is that you performed one of my favorite pieces, and I guess it's one of yours as well, Aphasia by Mark Applebaum. Yeah, and I was just blown away that you took the time and effort to learn that piece, and you just did it so eloquently. And I assume you were there when he visited Butler and performed it himself?
I was.
I think that's the first time I actually saw you in person, was at that master class with Mark, and so
yeah, delightful man. And his music is just so creative and interesting. If you've seen any of my graphic scores, you can probably tell that Mark Applebaum is a really big influence on my work. But yeah, was asked by Frank over at Butler, Frank Felice, to learn and perform this piece. Mostly because I kind of look like Mark Applebaum. I have a lot of hair. So he thought, this wild woman would probably be a good person to do this piece. So he gave me the score, and I looked at the score and I said, this is ridiculous. I need a video. So I found a video of Mark performing it online and then mirrored it so that I could learn it visually.
Sure.
It's honestly a much better way to learn that piece than by looking at the score.
Oh my goodness, yeah. Only
if
Mark.
You've ever seen that work, it's crazy.
Only he could understand, or I suppose there's somebody out there that could. But yeah, I would be with you on the video. I had a month and a half to learn it, so we're taking the intuitive approach. I think I practiced the first 30 seconds and shut it off. I was just like, okay, But I do watch that thing all the time still, and I love it. So, well, that's great.
Yeah, that piece is actually kind of a really interesting sort of segue into where I've been trending as a composer, because Mark was one of the first composers to sort of demonstrate to me that music is a lot of different things. And I've always kind of been a lot of different things. I'm a visual artist. I like kind of dipping my hands in a lot of different pies. And that was one of the first pieces where I realized, I could do something like this. It would still really kind of tickle my musical side, but it would also get at this other kind of playful, general creative kind of thing that I've always been drawn to.
I love how you embrace you. And by that, I guess what you just said, I just love how you are so many different things. And even though I don't really know you all that personally, I can just see on your presence with all of the things that you are interested in, via social media, and just the way you present yourself, even through your website. I love how you embrace that. I think a lot of times in music, we have to, I know I was sort of taught with an all or nothing mentality, and that anything other than music was, not worthy of our time. But boy, that's what can make, obviously, music so much better is the multifacetedness of us, we see that, I think we see that a little more today than maybe a few years back, but it's awesome. It's really great. So, okay.
Yeah, and there are so many musicians out there that are starting to embrace that, like you're saying, people like Pamela Z and just like different artists who realize that creativity is not something that just stops at music. And it's something that's influenced by everything else that we do, everything else we experience.
Sure. That might be the conductor side of me as well. That is the all or nothing sort of thing, because I think sometimes the conductor side versus the frosted composer side can steer more towards the militant side of...
Gotta have order.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So that's great. Okay, so I think we could sort of segue to where you're at right now. You have been a busy person. You've done some traveling lately. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so in 2016, I was invited to Iceland to go and work as an artist in residence in a tiny little town called Olafjörður. It's way up in the north. It's just surrounded by mountains and ocean. Until, I think, the 70s, there was no getting out of it in the wintertime. It's one of those places where you don't see the sun for 3 months. And I was just there, and I was working. And I think that was the first time in my adult life where I was really able to just focus on making music. I was, even in college, I was working 3 jobs, I was married, I was busy, I wasn't able to just zero in on music. And that was really the first time. I almost starved to death, but I was able to kind of play with some of these ideas of mixed media that I hadn't really explored in college as much. I built a sort of, we'll call it a sound sculpture, that I've since gone back and showed in some different places in Iceland. But I really got to kind of play with electronic music. I got to play with the visual side of things and learn how to do some new kinds of art. I got to play with geometry and architecture and ultimately make kind of a cool experience. And I think that on that trip I started realizing that I'm much more interested in creating experiences that immerse a few listeners than creating pieces for large concert halls.
Interesting. That program sounds like it was right up your alley.
It was really hard. There were some difficult sort of situations to deal with. It was really hard to get materials. There were language barriers with the people who were running it. The folks who ran it really didn't know how to put on music. They were much more adept with visual art. So that was a sort of new thing that they had to navigate, but ultimately we ended up doing something really beautiful that I was really proud of. And I think that sort of sent me on a path to exploring more visual art in my music. So I've since been back a total of 3 times.
Wow.
Yeah, for that piece specifically. Wow. I've taken it a few different places up north, and then I've also gone to the West Fjords a couple times. And it's actually standing in an old factory right now. It'll be up there until the end of the summer.
Oh, cool.
But it's one of those things where I was able to put it on a loop, and people can kind of come and go as they please and interact with it however they feel comfortable with. And I've always kind of liked art like that. So it's been really fun to get to build it in some different places.
Interesting. Acoustic versus electronic. Do you kind of bounce back and forth a lot right now, or do you feel like you're leaning one way or the other at more times than others?
It's a really good question. I've definitely done a lot of electronic things. I'm really interested in non-musical sounds and arranging them musically. But I am still in love with traditional acoustics. I mean, you can't hear a violin and not just cry a little bit.
Right.
There's something really beautiful about that honest, pure, intentionally musical sound. But I've found as a struggling emerging artist, electronics are cheap.
Yeah.
And they're really kind of easy to put together. You don't have to deal with many performer schedules. You can sort of have a perfect performance every time, which is really appealing.
Yeah, it is.
So I like to have a foot in each world pretty solidly.
Sure, absolutely. What are you composing right now?
Right now I'm working on a multimedia experience kind of thing, which may or may not work. We'll see. But it is following a few different populations through North America. So I've taken stories of Native American war chiefs and Black Americans, slaves and sharecroppers, and sort of documented their stories moving, for the most part, from east to west or from south to north. And then I've also found some really interesting talks and speeches given by Black Lives Matter activists, folks at the DAPL pipeline who were at Standing Rock, and then folks on the other side. And I've been trying to create this multimedia work just sort of about what America was built on, and just sort of like create this experience that involves visual art and live acoustics and spoken word, but also just something that's very immersive. It's something that I've been working on. It needs a lot of time to kind of fester, but at this point I'm in the data collecting stage of it, which has been grueling.
I love that. It sounds wonderful and so interesting. That sounds great. And it's a wonderful segue maybe into our next topic. With these interviews, of course, we can't ignore the obvious title of this project and endeavor.
Sure.
This endeavor. I guess in retrospect, or maybe even eventually, the title of this could have been an anthology of underrepresented composers. It doesn't have to necessarily be women, but we've got to start somewhere.
Sure.
So we've just kind of opened up the dialogue and asked each interviewee, how you feel about the topic. And as we're watching, I believe we're watching history unfold. Unfortunately, we never recognize history as we're involved in it. It's always 100 years down the road, it'll be in textbooks and be a big deal that those music history students are going to have to study. So I think it's really important to be aware of things that are changing, hopefully, and it looks like it. But what's it stir up for you personally when the topic of women composers or even just underrepresented composers come up?
Great question. I think for Michael, what was stirred up in me was the sort of exhaustion with the topic. It can be very frustrating to work very hard to produce quality work and consistently have it reduced to, my gender. So it is challenging to be passed over for opportunities that a man is more implicitly trusted with. Even if my work is just as good or better as the person next to me. At the same time, I don't like to spend a lot of time being upset about that. I would rather funnel my frustration into making more work. There are a lot better things for me to do with my time than to be angry about, the thing that happened 3 months ago where I felt like I was being passed over, or, the competition that I didn't win. It's kind of water under the bridge. But I recognize at the same time that I have a certain amount of privilege in saying that because, I'm not a visibly black person, or I'm not, another person who, has different disadvantages than I do. Because I'm relatively well-spoken, I'm pretty well-educated, and there are people who have a lot of really excellent things to say. There are people that I see every day at my job who have really important and powerful things to say that aren't heard. So I think I'd rather funnel my energy into making more work and making more voices heard.
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful way to put it, and I believe that so far all of us that have chatted through these episodes have agreed that it's not so much isolated down to just gender, but just being aware of each other and simply being aware of each other. But at the same time, I guess we can't argue with history and what we've seen in some of the biases and when you get a 2-hour concert with a program of nothing but males, and not that a woman should be on the program just because she's a woman, but the likelihood that there wasn't one piece by a woman that was equally or better than any other program, sometimes that's where we sort of have to squint a little and raise our finger and say, oh, now wait a second. So I think that over the years, definitely, of course, we've seen improvements, but we have always have room to grow. And I think there's just so many wonderful projects going on to help answer some of those questions or help ease some of those growing pains. So it's there's just some good stuff happening. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, I love your perspective. So, future, what do you? I know, right? That's the hardest question for me. I'm just trying to make it day to day sometimes. So, but what do you see on the horizon, or what do you hope would be on the horizon for you in the next year or so?
Yeah, that's another really, that's kind of a brain scratcher because I've thought about it a fair bit. For several years, particularly after I graduated from college, at least 3 years, I was in a pretty dark rut. I composed almost nothing. I pretty much ignored the whole musical creative side of my life. I focused on finding a regular job and just trying to survive, telling myself that, I need to save money so I can go to grad school. And ultimately, that didn't happen. I was just stuck in dead-end jobs. I was miserable. I wasn't doing anything creatively. Ultimately, I needed to go on medication and go into therapy and figure some stuff out. But I think that in 2017 or so, I really started realizing that I wasn't happy not doing these things. After Iceland, I realized this is what I have to do to stay sane as a person, and this is just what I need in my life, no matter what. This is the thing that I have to be working towards. So hopefully in the next year or so, I can start applying to grad school. That's been a goal for me because I have my bachelor's at this point. I don't have a master's. I would eventually like to be able to teach in a university setting. I really enjoy university culture. I really love working with that age group, with that sort of, not even age group, because it's amazing. We have so many people of all different ages. My husband's 28, he's going back to school this year.
Yes, that was me.
Yeah. But just like that mental place, people in that place where they're learning something very deep about who they are, where they're figuring out what their voice is and what they want to say. I'm really interested in kind of working with that population. At the same time, I want to do this weird, crazy multimedia stuff, and I don't really know how to go forward with it yet. So I'm hoping that grad school will kind of springboard some of that for me and give me a little bit of direction in that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And to go back to Iceland, I'd like to do some summer festivals, and we'll see what happens.
There's so many wonderful opportunities, almost too many opportunities for us to even consider, but that's a wonderful problem to have. Thank you for being transparent about the mental health aspect. That's something that I recently had a professor down here at LSU. When he opened up the class, it was in his syllabi, about mental health, taking care of yourself as a musician. I have to tell you, I think that's the first time I've seen that included in a syllabus before, and I thought it was very wonderful for, a professor, Dr. Jeffrey Perry, thank you very much, for him to, reach out and just open up the dialogue about that and say, hey, it's okay to, self-care and to look for help or ask for help or things like that. So, that's a whole other shoebox to open, but I think it's important for musicians, that's a completely different interview, but I think it's really important topic that could be explored through this project as well, as we speak to other people, and it would be a great topic question, and you're the first one to bring it up, so thank you for that. It's very wonderful. So let's see, is there anything that we can always circle back? Just because it's past, present, future doesn't mean that we have to skip forward too quickly. Is there anything else that pops into your mind, or I see this resource, I don't know, perhaps students, if they are wanting to write essays or papers about living women composers, we have added some, tips to students, and I call it a little bit of propaganda, just sort of educational material. What advice would you give to a young fledgling composer that's maybe feeling uncertain about the whole entire world and what their existence is?
Lean into that. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people, a lot of professors, and a lot of people in the music world will tell you that if you are not 100% passionate about one thing that matters to them, that you don't belong. And I think that's a lot of BS, because I'm passionate about a lot of things, mm-hmm. and one of them is music. But I'm also passionate about being a painter, and I'm passionate about animal welfare, and all of those things inform my music. And when I was in college, I was not one of the hardcore ones. Now, I'm probably one of the only ones that I knew who's still really composing a lot. Mm-hmm. So don't be afraid to be a late bloomer. Don't be afraid to question why you're there. The whole point of college should be figuring out what you want to do. If music is part of that, but not the whole thing, that doesn't negate your value as a composer.
That is beautifully said. Absolutely wonderful. So much. Well, Gabrielle, this has just been an amazing interview, and thank you so much for opening up about your life. And if you're still hanging in with us, on each interviewee's page, we link to anything that we talked about, whatever is mentioned, festivals or schools or people, if they have an online presence, then we link to that person or organization to just try to spread awareness for different resources and things that might strike a chord, pun intended, with someone that may have experienced your interview. And so that would be on the neverthelesssshecomposed.org website. So thank you so much again, and we just can't wait to see all of your great creations in the future and keep in touch with everything that goes on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real treat to get to chat with you, and I'm just really, really grateful that you're doing this.
Well,
it's a really cool project.
I feel like the lucky one because I'm just meeting so many amazing people. And then also at the hopefully spring of 2020 that we're shooting for a printed anthology. So all of these interviews, and you can go back and view any of them, and they're in numerical order, I suppose. And those will be transcribed with each composer's bio and pictures and anything related to the interview into a printed anthology. So and so that we can just, spread awareness, spread music, and keep creating. So, all right,
Wonderful.
thanks so much, Gabrielle.
Thank you.
All right.